I hate soccer.
Sure.
I just want to learn.
Okay.
And, well, when that happened, and I know that Christmas had you come into Will South.
Yeah.
Once or twice. And she plans on using you again. It's like, I need to talk to somebody because we joke that a lot of our sessions become therapy with a soccer ball because some of these kids are under so much stress and pressure from their parents, from being able to play college soccer and everything. And it's heartbreaking sometimes because it's supposed to be a sport. It's supposed to be a game. It's supposed to be fun. And it's just a lot of it.
It's a lot.
A lot of them aren't having fun anymore.
Right.
So it's just really, really frustrating. That's where I started everything. But, I mean, so you used to be an assistant athletic director at UB when Charisma was there?
I did.
Yeah. How long were you there?
About 22 years.
Oh, wow.
So I've been in private practice in some capacity my whole career.
Yeah.
When I was at UB, I was there full time. So I did my private practice work evenings, weekends.
Yeah.
And then I went into private practice full time going on 3 years or so.
And then you left that job and now you're just doing that full time?
Full time.
Wow. And it's kind of like, was it kind of like, did it start out as a side hustle or was that your primary focus? And then
So I was a student athlete, went away to college to swim.
Okay.
Originally from Buffalo.
Okay.
Got injured.
Okay.
What we know would be a classic story on the mental side, didn't know then. What I know now. All the grief and loss and depression and anxiety and loss of identity and all the things that can come from doing a single sport my whole life since I was 5. I was a single sport athlete.
Yep.
And then I had to sit out for a year and have surgery, and I was isolated from my team and all of that. And I had no one to talk to other than my athletic trainer back then, who I cried to every day, you know.
Right.
And then I realized sports psychology was a thing.
Yeah.
I was already I knew I wanted to do something in sport. So I was thinking maybe athletic training.
Right.
So I was a psych major, coaching minor anyway.
Okay.
And then I went to grad school for sports psych. I wanted to be able to, offer maybe a different experience around support for student athletes that needed it. I usually describe my role as like I don't have a dog in the fight other than helping an athlete find their way, continue to find joy in it, right?
Absolutely.
Hopefully put the static aside and continue to do this for the reasons that they started doing it for, which sounds simple, not, right? So I moved back to Buffalo in 2001.
Okay.
And so started private practice all the way back then when no one had any idea what sports psychology was.
Right.
And then I started at UB full time. A lot of student support services, a lot of wellness, life skill development, career development. And then because I had the sports psychology piece, that was part of my role there, which then over the years grew as the mental wellness side, right? And the emotional support.
And the focus of that.
Yes. But about 3 years ago, I decided to go into private practice full time.
Yeah.
So,
and right after COVID?
couple
Couple
years
after?
Yeah, and I'm still teaching and working with teams and all of that. But it was a good segue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's plenty of work. There's plenty of work.
I love how you said one sport athlete, and I find that a lot of these players are defined by being that athlete. And then when it's taken away from them or they're done, they're like, what am I? Who am I? And and I know that injuries, I luckily have not had a bad injury, but I know how lonely it can be.
Yeah.
Charisma went through it, twice with her ACLs.
Yes.
And you were probably around her when she did her second one, her senior year of college. So, I mean, there's so many players that don't have that person to talk to other than their family, and sometimes that can be exhausting for players.
Sure.
And what do you think of the one sport athletes? Any opinion?
Oh, I have lots of opinions. That in a nutshell is probably the biggest challenge for families that are trying to support, right?
Yeah.
Their athletes through this process is, what is that?
Yeah.
You know, what does specialization look like? Should they allow their athlete to specialize? And if so, when? And coaches have a big part in that of, you know, all of the static and expectations and
putting guilt on players. Or like, where have you
1000%.
been? Why aren't you at practice?
Yep.
And
so unless families are very, very diligent about, you know, creating a value system in their four walls that works for them and their child around sport, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's not a judgment, right? It's just, it's a tough thing to sort of figure out. It's also, you know, there are some kids that love to play multiple sports as they're coming up through, and others that are like, all I want to do is play soccer when they're 9, 10, right?
And they don't even know yet.
They don't know yet, right? And so,
yeah,
and so parents say, well, it's what they want, you know, and the athletes think it's what they want. And there's certainly enough 365 camps and clinics, right? And showcases and
training. Oh, come train on your off day,
right?
And then
yep.
When I started 10 years ago in Buffalo, or here, I was like the only supplemental soccer trainer that did this full time. Now there are 15 to 20. And now these kids can train every single day.
Yep.
And these kids are so burnt out.
Yep.
It's because if they're 3 times with their club, then once with me, then once with another, and then once with another, and then they have lifting or some kind of fitness, and it's these kids are nonstop.
Yeah.
And it's
yeah.
I just don't know how we. Well, I don't think there's any going back, really, because I think the pressure on, especially in soccer, the pressure on some of these players to play D1 or whatever is so high. And how many problems, and I could look at myself like this too, is how many of these youth athlete problems are because of adults and what adults do. It's coaches, it's parents, it's sometimes it's teachers. I mean,
sure.
Do you see that? I mean, I know there's definitely peer stuff too. But.
Sure. No, I think it's the system. You know, in the States, we, you know, our youth sports system is just totally insane.
Yeah.
Compared to pretty much anywhere else in the world, right? That's painting with a wide brush because you know there's some other extreme situations, right? But like for us, as far as what's available, and sort of how we structure, right, the expectations for specialization, right? Also from a socioeconomic standpoint for, you know, athletes and families that have the resources to be able to offer extra services and extra training, right? But we live in a culture that, you know, we wear exhaustion like a badge of honor too, and that almost sounds cliche now to say that, but so I spend a lot of time talking about the value of rest. No, seriously.
I'm
the value
100%
of, you know,
with you.
And having to, you know, say, okay, balance, right? And rest is like, those are our friends.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you don't learn that now, when you get to college, right?
Yeah.
So your body's going to pay for it, right? And being able to listen to their bodies and to not feel guilt around it. And part of it is peer, of they're looking around, right? And, well, so-and-so is going to extra training and so has this, you know, extra thing going on. So I think that's, you know, for families to really try and like keep a pulse on, reading how their kid is responding. If
Right.
they're exhausted all the time, they're sore all the time, battling injuries, overuse, they seem burnout, they're not themselves, they dread going to practice, like paying attention
Yeah.
to those cues, but they feel like it's a nonstop, right? It's like the line in the sand continues to move of expectation, right? So if I don't do this extra, am I going to get seen, right? Am I going to continue to move forward like, the rest of my teammates, and am I missing out, and I'm trying to get recruited and all the things. So that was a long-winded answer, but there's so many layers to it. And I think the other piece of it is social media.
Yes.
Right? And so soccer in particular being on the timeline that it's on, right? So if these kids don't, if the girls don't get, their phones are not ringing off the hook on June 15th, they think they've missed the boat.
Yep.
And so helping them understand and normalizing the fact that everyone has their own story, everyone has their own timeline, but they are hearing, right, or seeing on social media, right? So this person already verbally committed, and this person or they come to practice and say, I got 6 phone calls today, and and then their confidence gets shot, and it's just this cycle, right? Mm-hmm. And so helping them sort of got to infuse them with, again, all the things that they're doing well, and sort of like to trust their process, right?
Yeah.
Also that not every student athlete is going to go D1, nor should they.
Exactly.
And not every kid that's playing high school soccer, right, or travel soccer should play in college.
Yeah.
Unless you want it enough to do that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And,
yes.
What you said about, we kind of celebrate the no pain, no gain. We celebrate early bird gets the worm, and how hard you're working, and all of that. And it's definitely destroying these kids. And I think it's destroying some relationships between some players and parents. But the social media aspect, I just had a player in here who went through the transfer portal, and she says that she wished, from her first school, she wished that she took more time, that she didn't commit so early. And that nailed what you said about these kids. See everybody else around them commit, and it's like, well, why aren't I committed? Why aren't I committed? And the pressure is so profound. And do you ever work with parents? Or is
constantly.
it
Constantly. Yeah.
Okay.
And both of my kids are multi-sport travel athletes too. So I'm in the sauce trying to learn every day as well. And so I am wearing all the hats, just trying to do right by my own kids too. And definitely not perfect, I work with parents often, and a lot of times they don't love what I have to say. But, I'll tell them, you hire me, but from the get-go, right, that your child is the client, right? And so if we're doing this, right, we need to be able to have real conversation. And that being said, the vast majority of parents are super well-intended. There's some crazies, don't get me wrong, but the vast majority of parents are super well-intended, and they're just lost in the sauce, like everybody else, of all of this chatter, right? And not understanding the system and trying to figure out, right, what does burnout look like? Yep. How do I let my child, right, who plays hockey as his main sport, which could be 365, right? Continue to be a multi-sport athlete and be able to do the sport that is within his season, although he could skate now this time of year every single day of the week if he chose to, right?
Especially here in Buffalo.
Right. And so, all sports have their thing. My daughter's a swimmer, right? Could be 365, right? So every sport kind of has their thing, but being able to say from an overuse standpoint and a mental burnout standpoint and having their identity, right, be kind of made up of not only sport, in that particular sport, various sports, activities, music, art, academics, friendships, spiritual life, like whatever right? That looks like to, have them explore. If sport went away, who would you be, right? And as parents, being able to sit at the dinner table and have a conversation about other things besides sport. So that's subconsciously, right? Your athlete doesn't think that their value, right?
Yeah.
Here I am going down the rabbit hole, but
these
are the real conversations, right?
This is what I need.
Those are the conversations I have, with parents is, so what guardrails can we set? So is it no talk about soccer in the car? Is it no talk about soccer at the dinner table? Is it, you take cues from your child? Because a lot of times parents will say, I don't know what to say. I know I need to say something, but you don't need to say anything, right? If your child wants to talk about the game, they'll talk about the game.
Exactly.
Right? So talk about anything else besides soccer, right? If they know they underperformed, or the team underperformed, or they got screamed at by their coach or called out by a teammate, right? It wasn't their day, or they played fantastic, right? Or they were being scouted, like whatever was going on in the last couple hours, get in the car and just be a sponge, right? Just take cues from your kid. Oftentimes they just want you to be mom or dad. And again, I think that's almost becoming a cliche conversation because there's so much conversation around bulldozer parents, whatever they're calling this now, right? Helicopter, bulldozer.
I like bulldozer a little bit better.
Yeah, well, it's accurate.
How many parents? So we talk about the players identifying as a soccer player. Mm-hmm. How many parents identify as being a soccer mom or a soccer dad, and then when that's also taken away from them, then they're like,
scary.
What do we do now? There's no more games to go to, and I don't think they see that big picture down the road. It's like, what kind of relationship are you building with your kids when it's all soccer, or it's all hockey,
right?
And I've heard hockey's crazier than soccer. But I mean,
my son played soccer. I would say, yes, there's things about hockey that make the hairs on the back of my neck go up, right? And I work with a lot of hockey families. Let's just put it that way. But I think again, every sport has their. Baseball's also crazy. Youth baseball's crazy. So just pick a sport, and in some way, shape, or form, right, the culture's crazy. So I think that, so let's use Western New York soccer, right? So just our little bubble. Depending on what level our student athletes are playing at, right? It gets real crazy real quick because there's very limited options, right? And so everybody knows everybody, and then you get into the parents saying, okay, so my kid's trying out and may have made this team, but, my neighbor made this team, and, so then there becomes this push for parents, too, to be saying, what did we not do enough of? That, you know what I mean? That our child now, instead of, allowing, and some of that's just human, right? You're watching your child want this so bad, right?
Right.
Underneath that, I would say, what are we really looking for, right, out of it? But a lot of that's a rat race. But being able to say, let the coaches coach, which can be really difficult because a lot of times parents realize, like, parents aren't dumb either. A lot of it's politics. Right? A lot of it is socioeconomic, right? And being able to say, right, that I can do all these other things, build all these connections, send my kid to this, right, clinic or camp or showcase or whatever. So some of that weeds families out too, even the kids that have that potential, right? So it gets real quickly, right? So I think in our area even, you want to talk about soccer getting crazy, it gets crazy pretty quick, right? As kids kind of get...
We have middle schoolers having to go to Vegas for a showcase. I'm like, there's no college coaches. This is on the boys' side. There's no college coaches looking at middle school kids. Why are we going to Vegas in February for any kind of showcase for a middle school kid? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Unless that is simply for, like back in the day, right? traveling for sport for the experience of getting to travel for sport.
Exactly.
Right? If that happens once a season, or it's the premier trip for your team, or like, that's part of what makes sport so amazing, is the memories, right? You get to see the country or what, so, but I think that has, right, there's the purity in that has also been lost, right?
I mean, I'm trying to think about back in my day. I didn't think about college soccer until probably my junior year of high school. Now it's middle school. I get messages all the time from parents from all over the country saying, "What do I need to do to get on an ECNL or a girls academy team, or can you look at this footage of my freshman and tell me if she's D1 caliber or not?" I'm like, no, I can't watch it because I can't.
And they're really just, right? They're really
doing what's
just
necessary,
doing what they're hearing, right? Is because you're talking about at the end of a sophomore's year, right? It's not that far-fetched for a freshman to be saying, like, I got another year.
right?
Yeah. And so parents are absorbing all that and saying, they're feeling like, right, they want to do right by their kid, right? But then the kids absorb all that too, right? And it's just this cycle.
And then, I've been so focused on how many players that I've had go on to play college soccer at any level. But then I talk to all these college athletes in this setting, and then they open up to me and tell me how crazy college soccer is. And it's, wait, what are we doing this for? What? And since starting this and talking to my former players that are all in college now, it's no longer my focus. The college soccer thing, it's no longer my focus. I want to make sure that kid has a great time in here and enjoys it. And for the past 7 years or so, the players that come in here, they say, I only enjoy soccer when I come in here and work with Charisma and work with myself. And you'd think that I'd take that as a compliment. It breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Because why did we get into soccer in the first place? So a kid could make friends, get exercise, have fun.
Right.
It's all gone.
Right.
It's all gone by middle school, almost, sometimes.
Right. Well, and I think that's part of where I feel like it's a privilege to be in a role like mine, of being able to be that person that can foster that conversation when they're in high school.
Yeah.
As part of them trying to navigate the whole process is trying to normalize that college athletics isn't for everyone.
Yeah.
Right? Well, and, give it the next couple of months and it's going to look completely different anyways. It already looks completely different than it did a year or 2 years ago. Whole nother conversation, right?
Absolutely.
But so if they think it's what they want, helping them explore what's behind the why. Is it really their journey? And for what reasons? What are they sort of manifesting what this is going to look like once they're on campus? What do they love enough about it to lift at 6 a.m., right? And be doing study hall hours and traveling. And there's amazing things about it, right? It's such a blessing, but it's a huge grind, right?
Yep.
So hopefully sort of planting some seeds of helping them just sort of like hit the brakes a little bit on it having to be on autopilot. Okay, so I'm playing at a certain level, so I automatically have to just plan to play in college, right? Also helping them understand that, like, college soccer at Division 1, 2, and 3 doesn't look that much different, right? So competitively, right, and sort of like the expectations of the athletic department, right, and some of that grind can look different, but what they're asked to do day to day, right? You're still training and playing, right? And for a lot of Division 3 kids, right, they're playing because they love it, and there's not athletic aid, right, included as part of that too. So that's a whole nother kind of culture, right? But I think, they have it in their minds about going Division 1. The other thing is the spectrum of Division 1 programs, right?
It's crazy.
versus, them thinking like, so what level of Division I are we thinking?
Exactly.
Like in your mind's eye, where do you see yourself going? Are we SEC? Right? Like where are we seeing ourselves playing? Because, you could play at a small Division I school. It's going to look very similar to Division III program.
Yeah.
Right? And they just think D1, 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 right?
And when I deal with a younger parent, they forget that Canisius is D1. They forget that Niagara is D1. And they're like, oh.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Oh, that's D1. Why are we so hyper-focused on D1 when that's D1?
Right.
Not saying anything about those programs, but...
That's a great fit for some athletes.
Absolutely.
It's a great fit.
One of our players that plays at Canisius, she listens and she knows all the players that come in here and talk on, on podcasts or whatever. And she says, thank God I went to Canisius because I am so happy.
That's great.
Yeah. It's like, that was a breath of fresh air. I can't wait to have you in here. So then you can explain why you're in such a good situation where some players just are not.
Well, it's size of school, home or away, right?
Yep.
Academic program they're looking for, the vibe of the team, right?
Yep.
To be really careful on, how much stock you put in the current coach, because you never know how consistent that's going to be, right?
But because coaches are always either under pressure to win, or they win a lot and then they could leave and up their job and get a better job somewhere else. So
yeah, so I think helping athletes do the work to know themselves well enough to know the reasons why they're choosing to pursue soccer in college, right? Also the idea that anybody that tells you they know what college athletics is going to be like before they get there, they're just lying to you. So you have to give yourself a season, give yourself a year. Mm-hmm. And if you hate it and if you're miserable, like your wellness is not worth, right? That doesn't mean you just throw in the towel because things get hard, right?
Correct.
But if at the end of the day, right, it doesn't feel like it's the right fit for you, you only get to do college once.
Yeah.
Right? So just kind of like, again, normalizing the fact of like, this decision you're making when you're 16. Yeah. Right? Doesn't have to be, right? Doesn't look the same when you're 22.
Yep.
For the athletes that works out for, it's fabulous, right? It's just sort of opening the door to be able to say, like, there can be gray area.
Yeah.
And that giving themselves permission to just say, like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Because they don't know. They're just hearing from, right, the people in their circle that have the information and are helping them navigate it, right? But, they need to know themselves. Absolutely. As much as possible, right? When they're a high school kid. Yeah. And that comes back to a lot of conversation with parents too, of parents trying to do right by their child and say, this is totally overwhelming. Right. How do we help our athlete figure out size of school, figure out, how far away from home they want to be, what level they should try and pursue, right? How do they reach out to coaches? How do they get seen, right? For some of the kids that are playing at a higher level and, right, there's eyes on them all the time, right, then they still have to navigate how they sort of whittle that down, right, and what feels like it's the right fit. But for the athletes that may not get as many, right, emails or phone calls, like, how do those parents help them get where they're trying to go? Yeah. And be true to them, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you find the balance between, in terms of what players are going through at a certain college, how does it go from, okay, completely bailing on just a tough situation with a coach or maybe playing time and working through it to, maybe get a little bit better or work a little bit harder to make sure that you are getting the playing time that you want, versus the players that, okay, you need to get out of here. You need to try to get into a better situation. Mm-hmm. Because there's a thing going on where, okay, kids are just leaving schools just because of playing time or just because, they don't like the coach or the coach is too hard on them. Mm-hmm. How do you find the balance of, okay, this is a toxic environment, and you need to get out of there for your mental health,
Right.
versus
Yep.
just.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode of the I Hate Soccer podcast. If you feel stuck in your recruiting process, we created a guide that includes feedback from 15 college coaches and 10 current college soccer players. Inside this guide, you'll find out what really works in recruiting, from showcases, ID camps, highlight reels, and more. Check it out at playmakertraining.com/recruited.
Suck it up.
Right. Well, and the portal has changed the whole landscape, right? So for an athlete who was miserable enough to sit a year,
Yeah.
right, because it was worth it to them to transfer,
Yeah.
or whatever that looked like, it
Right.
was a little bit more clear cut on how, right, or to retire.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of layers to sort of that conversation, but to help an athlete understand what's within their control, first of all, right? So helping them explore sort of what we would call locus of control. So in this situation, what are all the things that at the end of the day, right, you're going to invest in the things nobody's ever going to be able to take from you? Your work ethic, your grit, you're showing up as, right, the version of you, right, that you know is your 100% every day, right? And some days are going to be better than others, right? But doing the work on yourself, right,
Yeah.
to make sure you're not, like you said, just bailing because it's hard, right?
Right.
Also taking those cues of what's going on in the environment. So the external stuff would be what coaches' decisions, coaches' communication, team culture,
Yeah.
right? And so helping the athlete explore that to be able to then figure out, okay, how much of this situation could we move the needle on, right? If you stay,
Yeah.
potentially, right? 'Cause you're never going to control your coach. You're never going to control, right, playing time. You're never going to. So it has to be about your locus of control. And so do you think you've done everything you can to be growth mindset, showing up every day to be, coachable and do the work to grow? Like college is supposed to be about growth, right?
Right.
This isn't supposed to be easy. And sort of help them with a pro and con list, if that makes sense, right? Of staying. And then also talking to them about the fact that the grass isn't always greener, Your whatever is in your backpack of stuff is going with you wherever you go,
Yeah.
right? So your tools and your strengths, but also your baggage.
Right.
So you can do the work here and see where that goes, right? Or you can decide to go somewhere else. So not minimizing if they're really struggling mentally or emotionally.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to make sure they sort of piece out how much of it is what's going on with them. Because if it's them and then they leave, right? That's more than just environment.
When does self-awareness kick in? When does a player or a person just really become comfortable with, okay, I'm really good at this, I'm not very good at that, and that's okay. And when does that kick in? Never sometimes?
Never, right? We all know those adults that have none of that, right? So I think that's the investment, right? At the end of the day, for us as mental coaches, right, sport coaches, like at the end of the day, that's our job, is to help them figure out who they are, right? And to be able to, have that awareness about where their strengths and challenges are. And so not to settle and say, I'm never going to be good at that, right? But if you're giving feedback, right, to be able to accept constructive feedback, right?
Yeah.
Again, be growth mindset and that's emotional maturity, right? And so we're talking about self-awareness. I think the emotional maturity that goes with that, because we all get feedback. Do we absorb the feedback, right?
That's right.
Right. So the emotional maturity and that growth, I think, is where, and that's where the good stuff happens for the athletes that make it, right? Is that they're able to take that feedback, do the work, continue to show up every day on the days that it's hard, look themselves in the mirror and say, what do I really want, right? Is this coach being tough on me because they see this potential in me? It's not personal, right? To be able to separate out, right? Kind of their goals from their limitations, if that makes sense. But I think that's a really individual thing. So the athletes that are able to just like push through those barriers are the ones that are able to develop that self-awareness, right? What does the chatter sound like in their head?
Yeah.
Where is their confidence, right? Where are the barriers in their confidence and self-belief? Is that, how much of that is what they're absorbing from external stuff, right?
Right.
And then how much are they willing to do the work to say, like, I'm going to be unshakable, right? I'm going to show up and grow every day, right? But I know who I am as an athlete.
I had a player, right there actually. I had a player in Michigan. She had crippling anxiety to the point where she would pass out on the field.
Wow.
And crippling anxiety and severe depression. And it all actually stemmed from, she's dyslexic.
Okay.
And she has like ADHD, but and that the ADHD thing isn't really important. But so substitute teacher has the kids read it out in class, and she's dyslexic, and the normal teacher knows, you know what, Melissa does not read out in front of class. Substitute teacher comes in and asks Melissa to read out in front of the class, and she goes, "Oh, I don't read in front of the class." And the substitute teacher goes, "What? Can you not read?" And then from that moment, that started her crippling anxiety and stress, and she had the self-awareness, and that's where that question came in. And she was a high-level player and recruited by a lot of D1 schools in Michigan. And she's like, you know what? College soccer isn't for me because I can't deal with it because of the stress and the depression and the anxiety. And I love her because she was self-aware enough to say, you know what? I'm willing to give this up for my mental health.
Sure.
And it's like, I wish more kids had her self-awareness. And have you dealt with that a lot? The crippling anxiety to where she's passing out and can't breathe.
Yeah, and that's pretty extreme, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's, certainly that's a great outcome for her if she feels like on the other side of that it was the right decision. And happier, healthier, right? I would also say that hopefully she had the support she needed to try and explore that and move through it.
She did.
So that decision wasn't made like in isolation, right? That she was trying to, explore some self-regulatory tools and understand her triggers and that kind of stuff that, because she's not trying to feel that way when she shows up to play, right?
Exactly.
None of us do, right, when we get anxious, but understanding sort of what that's rooted in, right? And the ADHD certainly can have an impact on, right, information processing, right, and our focus of attention and how we take cues and coachability for sure. Okay. I'm saying that just kind of off the cuff without knowing her story, but so but we all have our own kind of things that we bring to the table, right? And so for her, if it's that extreme, then it's not worth it, right?
Yeah.
But I think for an athlete who does present with anxiety, helping them understand what it sounds like in their head in those moments, unpacking that, peeling back the layers, right? Really trying to sort of expose what's going on there, help them understand where the fear is, like where it's coming from. And then have some tools to be able to at least try, right? To show back up in those moments with some different approaches to self-regulate and see if that helps them kind of move the needle.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and now she's coaching, so, and she's back in love with the game through that avenue, and,
Which is great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it did help that she also played basketball, that helped her a little bit because, soccer was always going to be her college sport. And basketball, she did for fun. So she continued to play basketball.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things. Not every kid has that escape. The player that I was talking about earlier that was in the transfer portal, she played, she played flag football as well. And she's like, I loved it because that was an escape.
Right.
And we had so many players playing, so many girls players playing flag football because it's just fun. It's fun again. And that's how it was when they started playing soccer and before it gets crazy.
Yeah, and that's what is counterintuitive, right? When you hear that and it's exactly what athletes will say is like, my main sport that I want to play in college, right, is kind of over here, and then I do these other sports for fun. If we could flip that on its head,
I know.
right? But it's for any of us, right? When something becomes like such a huge piece of our identity, right, and all these goals behind it, it's so much tougher to just keep it simple and continue to do it because we love it, right? Because we've got all these layers of expectation. But if they really want to thrive when they do go to college, right, we've got to keep it fun, right? And that's when they fry up and burn out, do a face plant.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, we have several players like that they're playing. Like, on the boys' side, we have some boys that kick for the football team, and they're like so happy.
Yeah.
You know, because it's that escape, and it's that pressure escape. And then some of them end up being better at that's the sport that they are having a lot of fun at, and so to navigate that.
Yeah.
But how much team building stuff do you do? Do you do when you work with teams? Are you working on team building, trying to make them realize that they're all in this together and you're trying to make each other better? Because everybody wants to be on a good team. Don't make your teammates don't try to make your teammates look bad. But then you have to be competitive as well to try to beat out a player. It's like, how does that work?
Yeah. So, and I think that's also, sports specific, right? Because it depends on roster size, right? Level that they're playing at. But yeah, the team cohesion, trust, effective communication, conflict management, right? Which can look very different on, a male roster versus a female roster, and things feeling more emotional and that kind of thing, right? But yes, lots of team conversations. And to your point about it being competitive, right? Helping the athletes sort of normalize what that feels like when they're fighting for a spot.
Right.
And if you're competitive and you're all competitive, like in theory, you want to be on the team, right?
Yeah.
That your coach is going to put, right? The best 9, the best 11, right?
Yeah.
Out there, right?
Yeah.
And so where do you fit as far as how you're accepting your role? Right? And how do we individually have your goals kind of align with that so that you're not settling, right? But as a teammate, like, your job is to buy in.
Yeah.
Your job is to buy in, right? And so how do we help you figure that out? And then team culture, sort of helping athletes and teams explore their identity as a team. What are their values or guideposts, right? And then situations like that, how do their behaviors as teammates, right, in those moments when it actually matters, align with what they said their values were as a team. And that doesn't mean we're not talking about like all emotional, like winning can be, right? Success can be a value.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
So competitiveness can be a value. And we don't want to shy away from that, right? But how do they behave so that each of them is responsible, right, for aligning and back to emotional maturity? Like, some of them have more tools to be able to do that.
Right.
Some of them feel threatened by it, right? So kind of opening up that conversation.
Yeah. The competitiveness thing is, especially on these nationwide teams that go to these showcases, they could go to a showcase, lose all 3 games, but as long as they're the school, that program's coach is there, they're happy, regardless of how they play. And that it's almost like we're getting away from being competitive, and we're just focused on individual success, kind of.
I think soccer's tough that way too, because that also depends on the level that they're playing at and how the coaches are fostering that. Is the roster consistent all year? Are they bringing players in and out? Right?
Oh, yeah.
And again, not to go too much down the rabbit hole, but like all that stuff matters in team culture, right? If they try out right? Air quote, try out in May, June, whatever. And then as they play through the season, there's athletes being added to the roster that are coming from all over the place, right? That makes a huge, when they're looking, right?
Yeah.
Down the sidelines, like, okay, well that person didn't try out, right? And they're just, so I think there's certain pieces that can erode that and then showing up, right? And then you're traveling with,
Yeah.
you're only traveling a certain amount of kids when you're going, right? And so some of the kids that made the roster aren't traveling, right? And so it erodes some of that, right?
Yeah.
Team culture, and it just, right? You're just like just adding layers and layers of what can feel like drama.
Yep.
Right? And trust gaps, if we can call it that, with your coach, because you said, I made this roster, right? And then when it feels like it matters, right? And of course, then they're going to start looking at like, who's here watching me, right? Because does their trust really sit with their coach? Right?
Right.
Like, really, what is this about then? Like, does
Right.
their coach have their back? Right? So I feel like that's all part of it. So for a coach is also hugely responsible for building that culture.
Yeah. And that was one of my next questions is, can coaches influence culture? I think they set the culture. I think, and players drive it. I think players drive the culture, but the coach sets it.
Sure.
And he allows it.
Sure.
She allows it. And it's crazy. It's crazy because all of my life I've heard that, well, coaches can't create the culture that's player-led, and then I've heard that coaches can't give you confidence. They can only take it away. And I think that's hogwash too. I think coaches can absolutely give players confidence. And I think going back to that self-awareness thing, if a coach sees you being good and you tell them, and the coach tells the player that was really good, and then if it drops off that standard and you also tell that same player, okay, that's below your standard.
Right.
I think that builds that confidence of like, okay, this is what that coach expects of me.
Yeah.
And okay, this is how good I could be. This is what I just was. But I find that coaches don't communicate that. They only catch them being good, or some players, they only catch them being good and they don't see the bad. And then some players, they only see the bad and they never see the good.
Right.
And I think that's where coaches can instill confidence and build culture and hold everybody to the same standard. Not that I didn't say treat everybody the same. I'm saying hold everybody to the standard of if you were on player 15 on the roster for making a mistake, but number 1 does it all the time and they don't hear any correction, that's where the culture dies.
Oh, yeah. 1000%.
I think that if you hold number 1 accountable, 15 sees that, and then everybody is on the same page. But then coaches are like, well, she's this level and you're this level. There's a reason why my podcast is called I Hate Soccer. Because I have so much stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think that you said some really important things there. So much to unpack. So when we talk about confidence for any of us, right? That's an individual thing as far as how it's built, right? So your talent, your hard work, your preparation, right? Your fitness and conditioning, your soccer IQ, right? Past successes, the things that are like in your little invisible backpack, right?
Yeah.
That help you to do the work to be unshakable, right? It's like layers of a cake, right?
Yeah.
Feedback from others, including your coach, that's the icing on the cake, right? It's the way I'll usually describe it to athletes, describe it to parents. We're all human. We need feedback. Of course, like positive feedback from your coach feels good. You're invested. We're human, right? So it's okay to say that it matters to you. to hear positive feedback, right?
Right.
We just don't want that to be what makes or breaks how you show up every day, right? So helping the athlete to do the work to say, right, there's some balance there, right? But at the same time, right, for a coach has to be able to say, you know, this is the baseline, right, kind of culture of my program, right?
Yep.
And to be able to then consistently give that feedback, like you said, right? So, and coaches are human too, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to have their favorites, and there's politics, and there's going to be, right? There's all the things. But we know, especially with this generation, right? Here goes another cliche.
Okay.
But it's the truth, right? Any athlete right now in this generation that's been asked, right, will tell you that their relationship with their coach, right, being able to ask questions, get feedback, like that is the number one factor in how they will rate the value of their experience, how powerful their experience was, right? They want connection. They want relationship with their coaches, right? And so, I mean, when I was an athlete, you're talking years and years and years ago, like, sure, it was great to get feedback from my coach, but like my coach was my coach, right?
Right.
It was a lot more, right? And that didn't mean, you know, that there was no communication or no relationship there, but there was a lot less of an expectation, right? That there was going to be that level of relationship and feedback, that athletes want that, right? And so it helps to shape their experience. So when they're talking about the quality of their experience, right?
Yeah.
This generation, right? They want to be able to ask questions. They want to be able to get feedback. They want to be part of the discussion, right?
Yeah.
And so if that's missing, or it feels like they're like, okay, does that coach have my best interest in mind? Because if not, right, then it starts to erode things. Right. So 1,000% the coach is responsible for. The other part of, you know, coaching is mentorship. So take all the X's and O's out of the equation.
Right.
Like, we're in the business of developing young people at the end of the day. Yeah. So if we're not able to say, like, we just invested in, right, what's going to help them to grow as people, and that doesn't mean coaches are going to be perfect, right? But what life lessons are we shaping?
Yeah.
You know, and how we're sending our messages, and putting your arm around a kid and saying, hey, I saw you had a rough day today, but I know there's more in there, right? I believe in you.
Right.
So you don't have to sugarcoat that they had a rough day.
Exactly.
You can keep that real, and you can also say, like, I know there's more in there.
Yeah.
I believe in you, right?
Right.
I can't wait to see you show up again tomorrow. Like, just take 3 seconds and make contact with the kid, and just, you know.
Yeah, and the way I've always looked at it is that the coach is part of the team.
Sure.
The coach isn't necessarily, sure, they're the leader of the team, but I just look at, as a coach, needs to be a part of the team. And they're all teammates. And too often I just see, I'm the coach, my way or the highway. And, you know, I'm going to tell every single one of my college players now that what you need to do going in and trying to find your best fit is you need to talk to current players and ask them about their relationship with the coaching staff. I think that
1,000%.
Because think about how much time a college athlete spends with that coach. They're on the road together. They're at 6 a.m. lift. They're at training in the afternoon. They're on a bus. They're on a plane. They're eating meals with. It's almost...
And that's it's not a friendship, right?
Correct.
There's always meant to be a healthy power differential between a coach and an athlete.
Correct.
Right? But you can have that, right, and still know that coach has your best interest in mind, cares, wants what's best for you, right? Versus if it feels like there's, again, what we'll call like a trust gap, right? Yeah. Of, I don't know if this feels like a safe space. I don't know where I fit. If I go ask coach a question, or we have a one-on-one meeting, if I'm actually getting honest answers.
Right.
You know, what coach says and then what happens the next day are two totally different things, and it starts to erode, right? So, like, and I think where coaches do their best work is to be able to know themselves well enough and do the work on themselves to have difficult conversations in a loving and caring way.
Yeah.
Tell an athlete where they stand.
Yeah.
Sit across from them and be honest and tell them where their growth curves are.
Yeah.
Be honest about their role in the team. Don't sugarcoat it and have them show up with expectations that aren't going to be met. Right? Then they have information. Information's power, right? So if they say, this isn't the right fit for me, I don't want to sit for 4 years. Our coach says, I can't guarantee you're going to play here.
Yeah. And just be honest.
Just be honest so that they can drive the bus on what they do with that.
Right.
Yeah. So like that's, even if it's a difficult conversation, it's the right conversation, right?
Right.
And then it's on the athlete to do the work to manage that, right?
Yeah.
To not take it personally and all those things. Like that's on the athlete to manage. It's not the coach's fault if they're being honest with you and saying, right? But I also think what an athlete is sometimes told when they're recruited versus what reality looks like, that's a whole nother
It's the sales pitch
piece of it, right? And they
have...
think they heard or whatever they were told, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they were recruited, or a coach might have thought they saw something different, or an athlete played at a different level in high school, got to college, pressure got too much, they're not playing to their standard, right?
Yeah.
Coach has to make decisions. You got to show up,
100%.
right? Yeah. Yep.
I mean, this might be, you can't answer this, but out of your clients, probably players, parents, and how many coaches do you work with? A good amount? Mm-hmm. Good. Because I feel, I was expecting players the most, parents second, coaches third. I think coaches need you. Because I think coaching can be super lonely. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, because when they win, they feel like they're on top of the world, and when they lose, or they take things personally. Like, let's say a youth player, a player that you've been working with for 4 or 5 years, they leave and they go to another club. And coaches will take it so personally. And that could be a very lonely experience. And that's happened to me back in Michigan like 15, 20 years ago. I think, again, that's self-awareness. Knowing that you need somebody to talk to. Mm-hmm. That's not your wife or your husband, or it's just somebody outside that could just... I think more coaches talk to coaches, but... There's something there that like I don't want to talk to another coach about what I'm going through. Sure. I'd rather talk to somebody like you.
Pretty vulnerable. Yeah.
Right. Because coaches have ego, and they don't think that they need help, or they don't think that they need. I don't need to hear from another coach about my issue or whatever. So if coaches are watching this or listening to this, I hope because they're under a lot of pressure too.
Absolutely.
These players are under pressure, but so are these coaches, especially college coaches. It's crazy.
For sure. And the mental wellness for coaches is a whole nother conversation around we need to do better to support the lifestyle, the expectations, all of that, so that coaches can invest in themselves to be able to show up every day as their best selves, right? Because the athletes are sponges, right?
Right.
And and it's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah, for sure.
Do you ever work with non-athletes and nothing, just the regular?
I do if other performance related, right, arenas. So
maybe like business, like very high up, or somebody with a high pressure job and stuff like that, or maybe a high pressure life.
Typically, so families or folks that are in sort of high achieving situations, right? Yeah. Lots of perfectionism, lots of, right, just driven people, driven families. A lot of times, I'll work with kiddos that are multi-sport athletes, but both mom and dad are, very well educated, very successful, high expectations, right? And just from the top down in their household, just trying to navigate what's healthy, what's not healthy to expect from my kids, those types of things. And then coaches, I work with coaches in groups or, to help navigate kind of what's going on with team culture.
The strive to being perfect.
Mm-hmm.
How do you fight that? There's a book somewhere around here. It's called Golf is Not a Game of Perfect. And sometimes coaches will want everything to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And how next play mentality. Yeah. The most important play in soccer is the next play.
Right.
And I've worked with coaches that will make players apologize for making a mistake. It's like that's not how I don't. How do you deal with the mistake? How do you get players to get on? Is that something internal or is that external or?
Mm-hmm. Well, helping an athlete understand where they sit around perfectionism. Because I think it's almost like this buzzword anymore, right?
Yeah.
We talk about like someone's perfectionistic or whatever. To help them explore what it sounds like in their head in those moments when they make a mistake, right? And knowing that like perfect isn't a thing. Like there's no such thing
exactly
as perfect. So how do we strive for excellence, not perfection? What are the little idiosyncrasies, right?
Yeah.
That we can sort of shift, right? The self-talk, the expectations, getting caught in, right, that cycle of not being able to be mindful and present because we're reeling on, right, and ruminating on what just happened, right? How much of, reeling through mistakes is around other people's expectations and judgment?
Yeah.
How much of it is our own,
mm-hmm.
right? So sort of peeling back the layers on what perfectionism feels like and sounds like for each person, and then helping them understand how to focus on excellence instead. So not settling or going soft.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, a lot of times in a perfectionistic mindset, it's like all or nothing, right? If it's not 100%, I failed, right? And it becomes like there's no gray area, right?
Okay.
Finding value, and if I got a 95% on my test,
yeah,
that's still outstanding, even if it wasn't 100. Like, where's the value in showing up, doing your best work, even if it's not perfect?
Right.
Right? Same thing in sport is, so the literal side of that would be, coming out of a practice or game and forcing an athlete to sit with their journal and identify 3 positive things that just happened. So you're still going to ruminate on the mistake until you work through that cycle, right? But forcing yourself to bring, what were 3 things I did well? What were 3 highlights, right? To try and push against that perfectionism.
Right.
Trying to get in the habit of finding the good.
Yeah.
Right? So having some actual tools to sort of like push against that perfectionism. A lot of it's habit, right? Also the expectations in their household, expectations from their coach, how mistakes are managed.
Yeah.
Right? So making an athlete apologize for a mistake, right? All you're doing, right, is perpetuating, right, that fear of being judged, right? And what eyes saw that. And because most of the time when we make mistakes, like nobody else cares nearly as much as we do.
Exactly.
Stand up and give a
can't
presentation.
Believe I said that.
You stumble over your words. Like no one's listening anyway. No one cares or ever cared.
They're so worried about their own
presentation. They're like, oh, there's 3 people going ahead of me. They're sitting there reading their own presentation. And they have no idea what you just said anyways.
Exactly.
Right? But we get so in our heads about, right?
Yeah.
That standard, right? So that's work, like for all of us, is doing that work. So if you're goal-oriented, high-achieving, driven, just as a human,
right?
A lot of times if you're a sport person, right? Any sort of athlete, right? Or coach, it's going to show up most in sport because that's, right?
Yeah.
Where our identity sits, right?
Exactly.
Strongest. And so that's why, it can feel so heavy.
Yeah.
And why instead of being able to compartmentalize it, and we get in the car and it's like the game ended, let's move on all night, right? Kids sitting at the dinner table, you can tell they're in their feelings, they can't fall asleep and ruminating, right? Instead of being able to just leave it on the field, it sits so heavy, right? So to me, that's the work because it's a quality of life thing, right? Burnout will happen if we don't get ahead of that, right?
How do you create an environment as a coach or as anybody? How do you create if somebody's having a very bad day in school or at home, but when they walk on the turf, it's like their happy place. Or can you create that environment where all that goes away? Stop worrying about that.
Yeah.
Is it through talking about it, or is it through just playing and having fun? Like, how can coaches create that type of an environment and experience for their players, where it's the best hour of the day, it's the best hour of the week?
Well, so that's, a great standard to set for yourself as a coach, that you're going to at least have that environment available. An athlete also has to show up in their own right headspace to absorb it, right? So we talk a lot about compartmentalizing. So, if you leave the house in the morning and your dog pees on the rug and you spill coffee all over yourself, right? Or you forget your lunch, or, whatever. Yeah. You're about to run out of gas as you're trying to come to work, whatever is going on. Yeah. You have a decision to make as you walk in the door of this place, right?
Right.
That you're going to leave it out there. And so literally talk about like a row of lockers, the parts of your day, and compartmentalizing. So you go to first period, we open up the locker, take out the books, right? That's where our mind goes.
Yeah.
When we're done, shut the locker door, on to second period, right? And so same thing when we're talking about, it's a lot of literal, right, tools for coaches to be able to say, because that's how our brains work, right?
Yep.
To be able to say, okay, when you walk in here, right, I did the same thing. I have stuff going on. I, got a grade back on a test, or stuff going on at home. In order for you to get the most out of the next hour and a half we have together, my responsibility, it's your responsibility. If you need to walk back out the door and come back in, right, only the thoughts that serve you are allowed in this building, right? This is your penthouse.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody gets a key card unless you give them permission, right?
Right.
So, and then helping them create like that space of, you've lost the moment if you're not where your feet are, right? You can't do anything about the test you got back in fifth period, right?
Yeah.
So having them kind of explore some of those tools, a lot of very like hands-on, that's how our brain works, right? I use a lot of the little garbage cans, like they sell them at the dollar store.
Yeah.
That's where negative thoughts go.
I like it.
So like having it right on the side, or when they go into a venue, finding the garbage can in the venue, and any negative thoughts, or if they're ruminating on what happened and they catch themselves, throw it in the trash.
Yeah.
Right? Erase, and then come up with a thought that serves you. I got this. Be in the moment. Be present.
Carissima does something like that. When she misses a shot or something like that, she bends over and picks up a piece of grass and then throws it and like, okay, that's good. That's away.
Yep.
That touch is away.
Yep.
Did she pick that up from you? Yeah. So
I take no credit for whatever she does. She's remarkable. She's remarkable.
That's funny.
But that is what elite-minded people do, is they're not afraid to say, like, I reach for my tools, right? And so we're only human. We've got all these pieces of our identity, right? And so doing the work to be, like, that's what mindfulness is.
Yeah.
This buzzword mindfulness, it's literally being where your feet are in the moment. And anytime you catch yourself, right, thinking about the outcome of the game, or thinking about the mistake that just happened, having the tools to bring yourself back.
Yeah.
All I can control is the moment that's in front of me. Be task focused, right? Next play.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is that mental toughness? What is mental toughness exactly? And how can you...
It's everything we talked about today.
Right.
It's a combination.
Can it be... it takes years.
Honestly, when people ask me that question, I say mental toughness is consistent excellence. Consistent excellence is mental toughness, right? Not perfection, right? But doing the work to show up consistently as the version of yourself that you believe that you can be, right? That's mental toughness. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Excellence.
Consistent excellence. So whatever is your 100% that day, which is going to be different every day, right? You have the tools to show up as that version of yourself. Like, that's what the great ones do. Right? They'll tell you they have the flu, or, they had a 12-hour flight, or they pull from whatever they need to get in the mindset of being able to show up. right?
Right.
That's mental toughness. And everything that's not serving them stays over here.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
I mean, really, it is.
That's it, because it's tough to define, but it's like for every single athlete, there's a different special sauce, right? But that's end game is consistent excellence.
I love that. I mean, how? Where did you go to school?
Temple in Philly.
Oh, okay. Jamie Boyer, Carissa's assistant.
Yeah.
Did her grad school at Temple.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, what books are you reading?
It's funny that you say that. I'll have to send you a picture of the stack of books that I have.
Yeah.
There's always a stack of books. I can send you a list of some of my favorites. Yeah. There's, or, like favorite authors. But I like to, I follow a lot of current coaches and athletes because I think even books, aren't always up with the trends we're necessarily seeing.
Right.
So paying attention to cues around, how we're communicating and language and what athletes are saying, right? Around where they're finding value in their experiences now in 2025.
Right.
Versus 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
NIL and the portal are just right. And now we're looking at, in the next couple of months, it's going to look even more different. So
especially with this new roster limit and all these sports and everything.
Yeah.
What coaches do you think are doing? What coaches are you following a lot? Anybody in particular?
Kara Lawson, I think, is great at Duke.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to look back through and think. Who's the swim coach at Virginia? His name escapes me. They just won their 5th national championship. Yeah, he's remarkable. A lot of running coaches too, because I think there's so much insanity in running.
Right.
Being able to look at athletes who are in a sport like distance running.
Yeah. And
find coaches who are able to, over the long haul, get those athletes to stay managed in their head. Yeah. Talk about perfectionism.
Right.
Right, and high achievement. So I think there's a lot of good stuff in that particular sport.
Right.
Because of the culture, and there's so much crap that goes on.
Yeah.
And overtraining and nutrition and all those types of things. So that sport, I have a lot of running coaches' books.
Do you find that there's a big difference between players or athletes that are playing an individual sport versus a team sport in terms of their mental toughness? I'm going to talk about her again. The girl that was in the transfer portal, she was a phenomenal track star as well. Mm-hmm. And I asked her, I go, do you miss track at all? She goes, I miss winning. Mm-hmm. And I was like, whoa, that was kind of like... Yeah.
I think personality plays a big role in that and how people are drawn to particular sports. Okay. Not as like a cookie cutter thing, right? But where people find value in their sport experience in an individual sport versus more of a team sport, wanting to be on the field at the same time as other teammates versus being in a super measurable sport like track or swimming, right? Can lend itself a lot to like someone's personality and where they find the good stuff in their sport experience. Mm-hmm. How much of that is team focused, how much of that is individual performance and achievement. And then within that, the mental toughness, because on both sides, there's mental toughness that has to come from that, right? Yeah. If you're swimming a race, it's you and you. If you're out on the field, right, with the rest of your teammates, right, and you have to be able to trust and communicate, right, and anticipate and pay attention to all those cues, right, verbal and nonverbal cues, right? So sort of understanding what about that works for you, right? And it's interesting because a lot of athletes will, like they play soccer and basketball and then they'll run track in the spring to stay fit, right? But it's the team sport that hooks them, right?
Yeah.
Or the other way around, right?
Yeah.
That it's like they're drawn to, like, they get the fix out of it being them versus them, right? And nothing's denying what they accomplish if they cross the finish line in a particular time, right? And they don't have to depend on anybody else necessarily in that moment for what they accomplish. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but it kind of depends on, it depends on the athlete and what they're looking for, and some of that is personality too.
Yeah.
Which is why the work that I get to do is super cool, because every athlete in every sport and multi-sport athletes, like there's so much nuance.
Yeah.
And it's really fun. I have the best job. I do. I have the best job. So,
is there a sport or an athlete? Is there athletes from a certain sport that are more difficult than others? Like I could imagine golfers would be really tough. If you're a high performing golfer, I feel those I can't imagine what goes on in a brain of a really good golfer.
So that's a bit of a loaded question. So here's the thing, right? So you have, if I have college athletes, it's a bit different, right? Across all sports. Youth, so grade school, middle school, high school athletes. Within, I don't want to totally stereotype here, okay? But very often in a sport like golf, right? Those kids that are playing golf are in very high achieving households, right? If they have access to golf and exposure to golf, not always, right?
Right.
But if golf becomes one of their main sports and they're able to train it all year somehow, right? Or go to tournaments or have a private golf coach or whatever, a lot of the expectation around, right? I mean, think about any professional golfer that comes to mind, right? And sort of the pedigree that. So I think it's multifaceted in the challenge that can be around that, because, and that's, again, no judgment. It just is what it is, right? But sort of the culture that's around that, right? And sort of the expectation and the messaging and all that. So golf is tough, right? I also have golfers that are retired golfers, right?
Yeah.
That it's maddening to them because their golf game isn't what it was when they were 25.
Exactly.
And golf is such a mental sport, right? So I think you bring up golf, I could talk all day just from the different, like vantage points. Golf is just its own.
That's crazy.
Its own deal. And you can take golf and talk about the mental side of, that it's an outdoor sport and conditions, right? And you can break down like pre-shot routines, right? And how they compartmentalize, right? Like there's just so much around the mental side of it. If they're coming off of like playing in a tournament, right? And they play day one and, right? They did not show up the way they wanted to show up. They got to literally come back the next day, right? Play the same course, right? So it's just super interesting.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
What? This happens with me, and this happens with parents. We will be doing a drill, and I'm watching from afar, and the kid is killing it. But then I get closer, and the kid starts to mess up, right? So I feel like you're in that moment, you're focused on me, and you're not focused on what the task at hand. Same thing happens with parents. A kid could be hitting perfect shots. Mom walks in, dad walks in, and then it's gone. So how, obviously, is that the issue? Is that you're focusing on me and not focused on the task at hand? Or you're focused on mom walking in or dad walking in? Is that?
We get focused on expectations, right? And we feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because someone that we care about their opinion now has eyes on us, right?
Okay.
So our focus goes off of task, right? and on to outcome or expectation, and then we shut down.
Right.
Right? So that's why, right, I don't know how you hold your training and practices, but a lot of times it's no parents because, right, even in a competitive setting, how many times are kids like, right, looking
Exactly.
for mom and dad, or something happens, they look at mom and dad. So we do a lot of work on breaking that habit. Like, what is that serving,
Yep.
right? Not judging it, right?
Right.
Because the kid's on autopilot when they're doing that, right?
Yeah.
Giving them the self-awareness on where that comes from, and it's not serving you, right? Never going to control who's in the crowd, right?
Right.
Never going to control who. So that becomes their work, right? And also to talk to parents about, in the meantime, right? And also like discourage your kids from looking at you during competition, or stand somewhere and then we'll do work, right, for them to break that habit, but it is not serving them at all. Parents that coach from the sidelines, same thing, right? If they needed another coach, you would
be the coach,
right? So nobody asked you to coach. That's a hard line for me.
That's why I'm hoping that this part of the conversation was going to go, because what are your thoughts? I think so many things could be solved if we just say, parents, leave. You don't want your kids take the test. They're not taking the SAT with you in the room.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And you don't want somebody at your job overlooking everything that you're doing.
Yeah.
So why do we do that with kids?
Yeah, it's the same. So I also don't allow parents in any of the sessions with kids either, for the same reason.
Yeah.
And parents will say, oh, but they're super quiet, they don't say much, right? And then they are total chatterboxes,
Yep.
right? When mom and dad aren't sitting there answering the questions. And again, a lot of it is, right, parents being on, right, their own autopilot of what they think they're supposed to be doing to fill in those gaps, or their own stuff, whatever they have going on, right? But those are conversations that, I'll tell parents, like, this is part of the reason why we're working together, right? When you bring me on board, you want the real conversation. So here's what I see.
Yeah.
Right? And so we have to have conversations about, like, boundaries, right? And I'll ask athletes, would you prefer mom or dad not go? Right? And sometimes they'll say yes, and then sometimes that becomes a conversation. It's a tough conversation, right? And we say, okay, well, if mom and dad want to be at your game, like, what are our ground rules here? Like, you're the one that's out there playing. What would you like to see happen? Well, I don't want mom and dad to say anything. Okay, so that becomes the rule, right? And then the kid reports back, right, on how that goes. But those are tough conversations, but they're in the best interest of the athlete, right? Which is the whole point of all this. And for you as coaches, right? Also helping coaches with tools to be able to manage those situations with parents. Yeah. Yep. And to understand what's inbounds and what feels out of bounds, and that it's, and they'll say, well, their parents are paying for them to be here, right, or to be part of the team or whatever. And parents say, well, I'm paying for this, I'll pull my kid. Okay. Whatever the situation is that, my expectation, and that's where, helping coaches to have their own tools professionally, to set those standards at the beginning with parents, which I know a lot of coaches do, is to say, my expectation is, if you're going to come and watch your child, right, I have a closed practice, but obviously we want you there to support your child when we compete.
Right.
My expectation is that I coach, you support. Right? Here's what that looks like. Anything outside of that, we're going to have a conversation. And the value behind that for me is that I want your child to show up and feel like it's a safe space, and that he's hearing my voice, right? And he can focus and pay attention, isn't looking over his shoulder for your approval or expecting that you're going to say something, right? That's why I'm the coach and you're not. And then to be able to back that up, like it actually happens, to be able to call a parent after a game and say,
can't do this.
Can't do it.
That's something that's never covered in coaching courses and stuff like that, is how to deal with parents. And
that's why coaches get out of coaching.
100%.
Yes.
100%.
Yep.
And it's sad when, teams are traveling to Louisville or whatever, and a player comes in and they're in a really good mood looking forward to the weekend, or they're in a very bad mood looking forward to the weekend based on which parent is going.
Yeah.
It's like, that's real. Mm-hmm. And it's funny that parents will send players to you, and yet they won't take your advice at times because they realize that they're the problem. Mm-hmm. That's probably really hard for parents. And like, how we have teams in here where parents will line the fence and they'll be talking and coaching, or the players are constantly looking, and we don't do this because it's kind of supplemental and they're paying extra and stuff like that. So we don't say no parents allowed, but I'm close to doing that because that's how I used to do it with clubs. Mm-hmm. And
I would ask yourself what keeps you from drawing that line, because at the end of the day, right?
It's about the kid.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not a you conversation. That's a across the board helping,
right.
Coaches and so they're paying for it. So again, end game is what? To help their kid get better. And
right.
So in the time spent, is the value, right, going to increase because they're not in the room?
Right.
In theory. Right? The message too is to give those kids the autonomy to have this be their space, right? And that there's not a parent hovering.
Right.
So if you're talking about even, my goodness, if a parent says to you, okay, my kiddo it's too young. I don't feel comfortable leaving them, then I think that's a conversation of, then maybe they're a little too young to be doing this kind of thing. Like, you want them to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of sport venues that do not allow parents in.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
there's clubs. It's a club-wide standard. They're like no parents.
Yes.
And it's good. And then the parents are upset about that. It's like,
yeah,
well, you don't need to watch.
Yeah.
You don't go into school.
Right. And I think that's a great parallel, right? Is to say you're not sitting in the back of the class answering questions for your child either. So
right.
And if they say, well, I'm not comfortable with that, well, then maybe do some more homework and come back when you are.
Yeah.
This might not be the place for you, right? That's how culture's built, though, right? Like, too, being able to draw that hard line. 1,000 times over, the kids will appreciate it. 1,000
Absolutely.
times over. They might say the right things in front. Like, I don't care if my mom or dad is there. That's then, right?
Yeah.
It's part of their filter, right?
Yeah, and it's building the relationship over time.
Absolutely.
Like, eventually, like, there will be some players that never talk to me, and then 2 or 3 years later, it's like, I kind of miss when you didn't talk to me.
Right. There's no off button.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, that is so beneficial, the dealing with the parents stuff, because sadly, they're a driving force of a lot. And we didn't really talk about peer pressures and stuff like that, other than, who's being recruited and how to deal with teammates and stuff. And that's a whole other conversation. Sure. And do you think it's tougher to grow up in today's day and age than what we had?
Yes, I think it's so different. Yes. I can't imagine. I think back to if there was social media, right? That's really it. Like, screens and social media, right? I think make such a tremendous difference in their whole experience. So I would say, yeah, I think it's more difficult.
Yeah.
There's the loss of a lot of the purity of just being a kid.
Yeah.
So, and I think from a youth sports standpoint too, it's crazy, totally insane, off the rails.
Yeah,
off the rails.
I mean, I'm thinking about some of the real high level players. One of my buddies that played at Michigan State, he's my age, and he has a kid going through it now. They're 5, or his daughter is 5, and he's already like, what is going on?
Yeah.
This is not how we grew up. And he's trying to navigate through it, and he's in Chicago, which is a metropolis, and it's bonkers.
Well, what's interesting too, and this could probably be like its own separate conversation, right? But talking about sport background of parents and how that impacts the lens through which they see their own kids' experience, which can go in 2 different directions. But what I've actually experienced more often is the higher level a parent plays, the more insane they think our system is, and the more they step back and let coaches coach.
Yep.
And isn't that amazing?
It
right?
is.
And so you have more of the parents that lack the confidence, right, and the experience to just let you coach, that are the ones that are chirping all the time, right, whether they have experience in the sport or not. So it's actually pretty refreshing to, when you get a kid that, whether it's the same sport or just played high level, that they're almost more on the side of, they err on the side of, the last thing I want to be is that parent. And so they stay totally out of the way. And they'll say, this is totally insane. Right?
Yeah.
Like, this is, what am I seeing here?
That's profound, because I've never actually thought about that, but we have a lot of kids from former hockey players, NHL players. Yeah. And that's so true, because they know the perspective. They're like, why am I freaking out over a girls' soccer game at 15 when I played into my 30s, and 15 years from now, then I've never thought of it like that.
Well,
that's so true.
I think they also have the perspective of, a lot of times they want their child to be happy and find joy in sport because, right, they know how heavy it can get, right?
Yep.
So whatever's going to keep this fun.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be fun.
I find that parents that are going through it a second time with a younger child are often a little bit better usually too.
That's a great point.
Because they've been through it and they're more calm, and they're like, well, this is going to happen, and this is the age and their experience. Yeah. It's like when my sisters started having kids, and it's like how they raised the first one versus how they're raising the third or fourth one. It's
I think that's
a little bit different.
Yep. Totally true.
So, oh man, I could talk to you for hours. Charisma was right.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
I'm happy to come back.
Absolutely, because there's. How can people get in touch with you? Just your website, Kellie Peiper. Did I say that right?
KelliePeiperSports.com. Yep.
Peiper.
Yes. Kellie with an IE, Piper with an EI. Yep.
2 L's?
Yes.
I'll link it to everything, and I'm going to and when I email blast this when it's live, I'm going to work with Kellie, because
oh, well, thanks. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. If you can take the workload, hopefully.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so glad I got you in here.
Yeah, for sure.
Because everybody needs it. All the players need it. The parents need it. The coaches need it.
Yeah.
And I think sadly, it's a very... Actually, it's a good thing. It's a good thing that mental health is being in the forefront.
Oh,
finally.
for sure. Yeah.
It's just sad how crazy it's gotten.
Yeah, and part of that is our system. Part of that is our system here, the way that we do things in youth sport. But there's a lot of great things about sport too. Obviously, I'm biased. It's my life's work, right?
Absolutely.
But there's still so much good.
Yeah.
Right. There's still so much good. It's just continuing to sort of for parents and to trust their gut. For coaches to trust their gut, right? To be able to keep the main thing, and it's supposed to be, right? Developing young people, giving them a positive experience, teaching them who they are, right? Giving them the tools to learn who they are, and the rest of it happens.
Right.
Right? It doesn't mean we go soft and we don't compete, right?
Right.
But all of that can exist, right? Yeah. It's possible.
Absolutely.
So.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I hate soccer.